I started thinking about all the different times where I have experienced a shift in my perspective and the community has experienced a shift in their perspective. In all those instances, there was one common denominator. It was having honest human conversations.
You know what? I'm in a law enforcement career that was not a part of the plan originally.
At the time, expressed that you felt that officers should have to go through the same process as civilians, right? If you kill someone, whether it's justified or not. What's up, everybody? What's up? And welcome back to The Human Side with Officer Jill. We're here for another episode where you know that we are committed to improving the relationship between law enforcement and the community. So we have a great guest. He is also law enforcement. He is a detective in Las Vegas, y'all, Sin City. We're going to bring him in and have a nice human conversation with him. Let's see. Let's welcome Detective Herring to The Human Side. How you doing, sir?
Man, I'm doing good. I like the intro. Sin City. Hey, Vegas in the house.
What stays in Vegas, they say. That's what they say.
They say it, but it'll come back.
It does not happen.
Warrants can be
Listen,
extradited. No,
and look, Baker to Vegas just happened. There's
Right.
all kind of stuff that came back from Vegas.
it's all kind of stuff come back. Don't believe the hype, all right? And don't come out here sinning neither. Be good when you're out here.
Y'all got enough, huh? Y'all got enough.
Yes.
That's what's up. Well, thank you for coming on the show. We kind of know each other. We're kind of family. But tell us a little something about yourself, man. What should we know about Detective Herring here?
Oh man, you know what? I'm in a law enforcement career that was not a part of the plan originally, and I started off as an athlete. You can see in the background, I got some of my
Yes.
memorabilia from my career. Right, I played
Love
Division I college football here in Las Vegas at UNLV. Had a very good career, and fortunately got my scholarship in psychology and met my wife in college, and a lot of things positive happened to me in this community. But the plan was football, it was sports my entire life since I was a kid. I was born one of 5 kids, so I have 4 siblings, to a pastor, right? I grew up with a preacher who preached a good word all up and down California,
Preach,
and I was
y'all.
raised I was raised with that faith-based background. It was God and football my whole life, and my dad was also my first coach, so he was all over my life and influenced everything I did. Football and faith was a plan, and law enforcement was not. Things happen and I get where I get. That's a little bit about my background in a nutshell. I love what I do, but I love who I was. And I think that's the thing that I've learned to embrace and accept is the journey that brought me here is not conventional. It's not everybody's path is different, but I'm proud of where I am and I'm proud of how I got here. Here I am, serving Las
Awesome.
Vegas. Stay from California, but Vegas made it home. My wife was like, "You're not going back," and she
She
snatched
said,
me
"We
up.
not going back."
We not going nowhere. Staying here. So I'm locked in on Vegas.
I love that. Man, and shout out to your parents, man. I love them. They did an awesome job. You can't beat faith in football, faith in sports. That's all
Yeah.
you need in your life. Faith in sports is all you need. It worked out.
It
'Cause you
did.
got a
It
nice little
did.
background back there. I don't know. I think
Man,
it made me want to pull out my trophies and put them up here.
I know you got them. Don't be trying to play shy. All right. You
Okay.
This is my setup at home because I do out here in Vegas because of that career. I do sports radio, sports talk radio out here.
Nice.
I have a podcast with the university on the football team during football season. So that's
Awesome.
why this is all staged this way.
Nice.
So
What's the name of your podcast? Who knows?
it's
Everyone
called
just want to
It's
listen
called
in.
it's called the UNLV All Access Podcast. So it's
Okay.
all access to UNLV. We do in-depth interviews. We had a segment called Under the Helmet. It's me and a player every week exclusively talking about life outside of
Nice.
football and then who they are. And so we do stuff like that and mix it up. But it's
That's
only during
awesome.
the season right now. We're trying to branch out, make it a full
Okay.
year thing. But that's how I got my feet into the podcast game. And
Okay.
that's my backdrop for those things.
Hey, I like it. It looks good, man. But that kind of brings me to the first question I want to ask you. As you all know, here on the human side, I am committed to helping law enforcement and the community members enhance their relationship and really rebuild that trust. And there's several ways that we can do that, but I think one of the ways that I know is effective is through impactful conversations, right? Because that creates understanding. And hopefully it creates not only respect, but a change in perspective, right? And so that's why I'm here. And that's why we are having these conversations. And so we're going to have a little conversation here with Caleb and I. And one of the first questions I want to ask you is What inspired you? Or what inspired your interest in becoming a law enforcement officer?
It's funny because I know inspiration is big, especially when you're talking about a career as noble as law enforcement, right? There's usually some tie, but for me, it was not. It was necessity. That's what got me started, right? I
Yeah.
graduated college. I had hopes, big dreams of playing in the NFL. Didn't make the team, and I had my wife who was pregnant at the time with my
Mhm.
first born. My son was on the way, and being the responsible and caring and loving husband, I knew I needed to become provider real quick, right? So
Yeah.
I literally had a friend of the family say, "Yeah, your city has some jobs listed up." And that got me looking at government jobs, right? And law enforcement obviously was one of those jobs. And it was at that time, although not a lucrative career, it was the highest paying job on the list. And that was how I
Yeah.
made the decision. I'm gonna go for that. And I was like, you
Yeah.
know what? I can do it. I can fake it till I make it. I could put on a face. I can do academy. It's not that physically hard. Everybody's talking about these push-ups and I'll be fine. I can do the mile and a half in decent time.
Right.
I'll be all right.
Right.
It's no big deal.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm gonna collect the check and I'll figure it out after.
Yeah.
After I'm done and I get my feet on the ground, save up a little bit, I'll move on. I'll maybe try football again. Who knows? That was my
Right.
perspective when I first clicked apply, right? When I submitted my first resume. Check. I checked that box and I was like, I'll do this for the family. I looked at it
Right.
that way.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got into academy that I found the inspiration and talking
Mhm.
to some of my tax staff at the academy and getting their perspective and their stories. But more importantly, seeing their passion and their drive and the ways that they impacted the community. And I could see myself being impactful. And
Mhm.
above all of the other things that I've done and playing sports and watching my dad and his ministry with the gospel obviously was
Mhm.
impactful. And I'm watching how he made an impact. I've always wanted to at some point make it, whether it be through public
Influence. Yeah.
speaking. Like after my playing career, you had those visions of yourself talking to the youth and inspiring them how to make it out. And that was always a part of the plan. So I just thought, like, how can I do that within this community? And boom, law enforcement presented itself in a way where I saw a different side of it and I saw that aspect of it. And I got to thank my tax staff, Bobby Vukanovich was one of the guys.
Mhm.
And if he hears this at some point, he was one of the guys who showed me that passion and really inspired me to
Awesome.
say, this career can be impactful and it can
Yeah.
change the course of society and the way that we are perceived as law enforcement. And if I can have that impact, if I can change lives in any way with this platform, then I'll do it. And that sparked the career.
Mhm.
It changed from a job into a
Right.
career in that moment, and that's driven things and inspired me along the way to move around and do special assignments and now land at the spotted detective within my department. So inspiration came, just not in
Yeah.
the most conventional way.
And I love that. I think it's awesome that you are a police officer. And I'll share this with the viewers. Prior to you becoming a police officer, I've been a police officer for about 15 years. And I maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years on the job at this point. I don't know how long I was, but there was an incident that occurred. I believe it was Philando Castro. I can't remember what state it was in, but he was killed by the hands of a police officer. And I remember you hit me up and you asked me a question. You're like, hey, what happens when there is an officer involved shooting? It's the OIS, what we call it for short. And I explained to you the process, right? The administrative process. Usually you're taken out of the field. Sometimes you have no public contact or you're working the desk and you're getting paid. And I remember when I told you that you still get paid, you were like, what do you mean you guys still get paid? I was like, yeah, they have to go through the investigative process to determine whether it was in policy or out of policy. And you at the time expressed that you felt that officers should have to go through the same process as civilians, right? If you kill someone, whether it's justified or not, you're gonna end up in jail. You're gonna at least be charged and you have to bail
Right.
out. So you felt that officers should have the same process. And I tried to explain to you that no, it's different. And at the time you didn't get it. You didn't get it. And
No.
it was intense. It wasn't I thought it was a great conversation because I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
having these conversations with people who don't agree or disagree. And so my question to you is now, how detective do you feel about
Oh,
that?
man. You know what? It's come full circle, hadn't it? Like, it's there. And I
Yes.
remember that conversation. I remember we've had a couple of conversations, whether it
Yeah.
was you and I together, since I became a law enforcement officer, talking to our families respectively about,
Yeah.
okay, this is what's going on. But I
Yeah.
remember that one. I remember being like that youthful, exuberant. At that age, I was very enthused about being involved in the community and
Yeah.
society and throwing my opinions into these kind of debates
Right.
and making it known. As uninformed as it was, I was making them
Right.
known. But I remember not being able to grasp the concept of a paid vacation after you killed somebody. That's what I saw. I was like, that's crazy to me. That's insane.
Yeah,
And now, obviously, learning what I know now and going through an academy and having the experience as an officer and understanding what the job requires, it's completely flipped the script on my thinking when it comes to those kinds of situations and being able to understand the totality of those circumstances, being able to not rush to judgment when all of the details have not unfolded, and
yeah,
understanding that there's nuance to the decisions that lead to OISs or to the taking of someone's civil liberties, and which
yeah,
is in essence what law enforcement does on a regular basis. But that to do that job, it requires certain protections. You have to be able to go into that fray without the fear
yeah,
that you will lose your
yeah,
entire existence.
yeah.
And when people in the community see paid leave, paid administrative leave, they think, "Oh, he's chilling on a beach somewhere." The
Not
first
so
thing I can
much.
tell you, yeah, that's not true.
No.
You're worrying about if you're getting ready to lose your house, your
Yep,
livelihood, your
yep,
job. Obviously, if you
yep.
lose that job in that way in
Yeah.
this profession, you're not getting it back. In a
No.
lot of instances,
Anywhere.
this is yeah, no, you're not going anywhere with that on
Right.
your resume. And then
Yeah.
in this industry, in this profession, you put all your eggs in this basket, right? Like you
Mhm.
train this. So if you lose this, you lose everything. And then
Right.
yeah, administrative leave, you're available to respond to anything that the department needs. Now you're not leaving the city.
Right.
You're there. And then you're dealing with the stress, like I said, of all
Yeah.
that's bearing down on
Yeah.
you. So there's reason for the administrative leave, and there's reason that the process is dealt out the way it needs to be because of what law enforcement is asked to do.
Yeah.
And as much as people may not understand it, I think I've gone beyond the veil now, and
Like that.
I see
I
the
like
error in
that.
my thinking before because
Yeah.
there's so much that this profession demands that
Right.
you can't execute this job with the same restrictions, I should say,
Yeah.
as the
Yeah.
civilian population. My eyes have been open to that aspect, and
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well as a lot of other things. But it's crazy how that just came full circle like that.
Yes. And I love that. And you mentioned not only are you worried about your livelihood, you could go to jail.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You had to make a decision like that, right? Based
Hmm.
on whatever's in front of you, split second, and now you could potentially go to jail and
Right.
go to jail with people that you arrested.
They know you.
They
They
know
know you.
you.
They ain't
They
forgot
know
about you.
you, and you are not. I don't care what they tell you. You're not safe in jail.
Absolutely
There's
not.
always a way. There's always a way
Right.
to get to you, right?
Right.
They
Right.
can try. The corrections can try as hard as they can, but there's always a way. It's still
There's
a big
always a way.
building.
There's
It's still
a lot
just
of
a
quiet
building.
times, there's a lot of blind
Yes.
spots, and they know them.
Absolutely,
Trust me.
unfortunately, yes.
When
So,
I got
yeah,
all day to think about it, Imma figure
you
out how
gon
to get you.
absolutely. So you have all those things on your mind, and I just love that, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have these type of conversations and on this platform because I want people to see this and experience this. You are someone
Mm,
who didn't have that understanding,
right.
right? But you just knew in that moment that your thought process was the right thought process, right?
I was
No one can
utterly
tell you to
convinced.
think different.
And
Yeah.
and we've all in this profession, we've come across people that are just as convinced as I was. And Imma
Yeah.
tell you something, in that moment, you were so receptive to the conversation,
Yeah.
and obviously you have that ability still because you're doing this podcast and you're doing the work, but you had in that moment even you displayed the ability to hear me still.
Yeah.
And I don't remember not being heard. I remember
Mhm.
we've never had any falling outs between you and
No.
I. Like,
No.
you've always been good. We've always been and we
Yeah.
disagreed then, but I never
Yeah.
felt talked down to, even
Yeah.
though, like I said, looking back in hindsight, how uninformed I was and like how bold that opinion was coming from such an uninformed mind. It was crazy that you were able to still communicate with me and be like, all right,
Yes.
cuz I love you.
Yeah.
Like because
Absolutely. Yes.
it must have been painful for you to be like, really? Is this how you're a smart guy? How you not putting this
Yeah.
together?
You
Like
know what? Yes and no, because I've had a situation for me before I became a police officer. I've always wanted to be a cop since I was a kid, but I've had my experiences actually right before I went into the academy. I say maybe 6 months, maybe 3 months before I went to the academy, I got pulled over. And I remember I was going to the gym. It was like maybe 10:30 at night. The gym closed at 12. I was
Mhm.
actually going to the gym trying to work out to get ready for the academy. And so I was smashing, y'all. I no lie. I was smashing. I had a hoodie on. I was in my dad's Chrysler, right? Back then, the Chrysler, everybody was driving it. Drug
Right.
dealers, preachers, right? It was the Bentley. It was the
Yeah,
affordable Bentley.
right.
Yes, I'm smashing. I got the music on, hoodie on, and I knew I went past this area where I knew motorcycle cops, but I didn't care. I knew they hung out there, but I was on a mission. I was just trying to get there, get this workout in.
Right.
And I remember I got pulled over, the motor cop pulls behind me, and I'm thinking I'm being nice. So I keep going. I want to go to a well lit area for him. So I
Mhm.
drive a little further. I get to a gas station. I pull in the gas station, man, and it's about 10 cop cars that come pull off. Said, "What happened? Is the place getting robbed?" Right? I'm trying to figure out why are all these
Right.
officers here, and
Right.
they pull behind me, and I'm like, "Wait, what did I do?" I was hot. Here doing this because I'm black. That's what I thought immediately because I knew all I would do was speeding. Fast forward that experience, I'm in the academy and we're being taught traffic stops. And they're teaching us all these different tactics, the things that I saw, the lights. And one of the things that the light bulb that went off in my head was they said, whenever you hear a motor officer go on a traffic stop, if you're in the area, go by there.
Mhm.
Why? Because usually they're by themselves. So it's a safety reason, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh, I literally had an epiphany in that moment in the academy. I was like, that's why all those officers showed up. I'm sure the motor officer probably said, hey, I got someone driving at a high rate of speed. They're not stopping. And whoever was close by, they came. And it wasn't until I was in the academy and I learned why it happened that I got that understanding. And like I said, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this because I think these type of conversations and more that I hope to have will give people a different perspective and a deeper understanding that hopefully it'll either change your perspective. You can try to have a better partnership and work together and collaborate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think I was able to respond that way to you because I know what that feels like.
Yeah, the
It's
light bulb's
sometimes a
gonna go
lot
off.
more. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that's exactly what it was for me.
Yeah.
That conversation,
Yeah.
my career has many a light bulbs, like you
Yeah.
said, have gone off, and
Yeah.
it's more learning to be done. I think I've learned to humble myself in the face of all this. I don't know it all, and that's the toughest pill to swallow for me. I was a know it all when I was growing up, right? I would argue with you about just about anything. Kobe's better than LeBron, right? And I
He
will die
is.
on that hill. I don't want to hear nothing.
I'll still
We could
argue that.
we we could argue about anything, right? And I think learning and having those light bulbs and those moments where
Yeah.
it's, man, you just didn't know.
Yep.
One, being able to have them, and then being able to forgive yourself for not knowing, I think has been a
Right.
big
That's
part
big.
of the journey. Like
That's huge.
I didn't know better, and I
Yeah.
think I can, like you said, you forgave me in that moment. Like he doesn't know
Yeah.
better. I talked about that's crazy. I just had a revelation up in here. Like talked about my background as with my dad being a pastor, and the word is all in me. But then it just right now I heard it in my spirit. It was like, Father, forgive them. They
They
know not
know
what they
not what
do.
they do.
I don't want to get all law enforcement all high and mighty, but that's the thing. When you have access to that information, you have that knowledge, you have to be able to forgive those that
Yeah.
don't. Whether it was you
Yep.
that don't know or somebody else that don't know, you got to be able
Yeah.
to forgive that and move with some humility through this life. So it's crazy how full circle you could say your
Yeah.
transformation has come from, like you said, that conversation we had all those years ago to now with the lens that I look at things through. It's just one, I'm more patient with it. I think I'm not as quick to judge any situation. That's the one thing I've noticed when there's an incident like the one you're speaking of, or if a Trayvon Martin type incident or George Floyd more recently, something like that happens. Everyone else, it seems, is very quick to rush to judgment. And I have learned through that rush to judgment that you need to take a step back and let the information reveal itself before you rush to judgments. And I think that's a lot to do with the temperament that the badge has taught me. It's you got to
Mm.
stop and think about the consequences of what's going on and all the totality of the information that you have at your disposal before you start making judgments.
Absolutely. Man, I love that. I when I heard that you became a police officer, I was like, yes. I'm so glad to have you on this side of the coin because I know you're a good man. And I know you're gonna do good work out there in that uniform. I know that we need more good people on the department. A shortage of officers, period, right? But to have really good officers that are gonna do the right thing, and for someone who had a different perspective, who's now gonna join and see and I waited for you to get your feet wet a little bit because I knew your perspective was gonna change because it's
Yeah,
different.
yeah,
It's different when you're in it. It's totally
yeah,
different. You have a different understanding. And I asked you, I think before I was going to even do the podcast, I just wanted to know because I just wanted to see how you were going to explain it. But I knew it was going
right.
to be different. I love that. And I think it's a great example for everyone, especially for the community.
I
I,
think that partnership is like the biggest key to all the
yeah.
perspective shifts, and because I think a lot of people have lost the understanding of law enforcement as a service and a partnership with the community.
Yeah.
There's things that we're tasked to do that are for your protection and they're for the protection of
Mhm.
the community. And it really is a service industry. And it's not just the community. And I think that has been the narrative as of late on the law enforcement side, at least what from where I've seen it, is that
Mhm.
we've lost that aspect of the
Mhm.
role of that the thing this even the safety that we do is in order to more effectively do the job. And I could go on forever about how I wish that society allowed that this job was safe. Like I wish
Yeah.
that we lived in a
Yeah.
world where it wasn't dangerous
Yeah.
to be a
Yeah.
law enforcement officer, where every you
Right.
stop somebody and they're like, "Oh yes, sir, I did wrong," and then here, put the handcuffs on me. We'll go
Right.
downtown. You're right, I did it. I
Doesn't
wish that
happen.
was the case. I wish, but it's just not that.
Yeah. We
And
we
you have
wouldn't
to understand,
exist though. If
right?
that was the case, there'll be
I
no
w
need for us,
exactly. There'll
right?
be no, so the necessity for the job is a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
But I just want the perspective to be at least considered on both sides of the spectrum, where the things that are done, the tactics that are taken, like you said, the way that you're stopped, the command presence, the way that officers are engaging in people with their stops, or just with the community. There's a reason for that. And then even more than that, the response that's written in policy might not necessarily translate the same based on the person that's translating
Mhm.
it. Like you don't know what an officer is going through on a day-to-day basis. You don't know what call they just left. You don't know what tragedy they just witnessed. There's a lot that officers go through and experience that the normal citizen isn't even exposed to. So having some grace for that mental state of law enforcement, the constantly being high stress, constantly being with
Facts.
adrenaline punching, fight or flight mode is almost a constant thing when you're on patrol. So I think just the public having that kind of understanding. And there's been efforts to reach across from law enforcement perspective to give people that training, to give people some semblance of understanding of the job that's actually being asked to do. But the closer or the better that gap is bridged, the better we can do our job and the more effectively the community can be policed. And that doesn't have a nice, soft, gentle sound to it. Like being
Yeah.
policed, what do you mean? I don't need to be
Yeah.
policed. We do. We do need to be policed. And even us, the police need to be policed. That's been a thing. Like we
Yeah.
need to check each other in these kind of conversations and getting our own perspective on what we've learned and
Yeah.
maybe some of the hard conversations I know I've had in my career. There's been some very divisive things that have happened. And a lot of people think that law enforcement is this sort of united front where everybody is on the same page.
Yeah.
We do the same job and we all got each other's back,
True.
but we've had some heart to heart, some discussions,
Mhm.
some real come to Jesus moments, if you will, behind
Mhm.
closed doors before we go out as a
Yeah.
united front. It's not a perfect science, but I think we're working there, and the perspectives are shifting for sure.
That's yeah, I agree. I would love to talk more because I don't think we talk about that enough. As far as like you said, it's not always a united front. We all do the same job, but the reality is everyone was raised different. Everyone has different views, so we're not always all thinking exactly the same thing.
Right.
So there can be challenges. You talked about how we may not all really think the same thing. We're doing the same job and we may be doing it for the right reasons or the same reasons, maybe not. But it leads me to my next question I want to ask. What do you think is the biggest misconception you think people have about law enforcement? And you can speak to it in general, but also to what you spoke on how you've had these difficult conversations even within the building, within the police
Mhm.
station, with your coworkers. If it's something you can speak to, I would love to know. You don't have to be detailed.
Right.
Still got to go to work. You still got to
Yeah, I
work with
still
these
gotta go to
people.
work. I gotta see these guys. But no, you know what? It's funny because I think the general consensus, I guess the general aspect of that question is I think people have the misconception that everybody in law enforcement is a jerk. Like everybody is just looking to the way I could put it in, I guess, a metaphor is like everybody has this perception that cops are the kids in school that got bullied and
Yeah,
now they got a badge and they're looking for revenge and they were
yeah,
never the cool kids, so now they're just hating on anything the cool kids done. And or the idea that the cops are the fun police, like anything that's fun they don't want you to do. So and that's like the general, the broad scope of things. And it gets narrowed down with like some specifics and case by case stuff where people have formulated really strict opinions.
mhm,
And some of the opinions that I've realized, you talking about like sovereign citizens and stuff like that, it's more complex, it's more complicated than that. It's a whole deep trove into what the government's infringement on individual rights should be. And then there's a very um hardcore aspect to that where it's like an educated aspect. Like you get caught by some of these guys off guard, these sovereign citizens. They know
Yeah.
their stuff and
Do you
they're passionate about it and they really mean for all intents and purposes, they mean well for their own from their perspective. And again, growing, I've learned to handle that. Like I get
mhm,
where they're coming from. But I think there's just this general consensus that the police are tasked to do something that nobody wants them to do and nobody asked them to
mm,
do. And we're so far removed from a chaotic time period in human history where order is a part of society, where things just happen and there's a structure to it. You don't know why you stop at a red light all the time. Most of you just do. And it's
yeah,
like, why is that a thing? Why do you stop at a red light? You never stop to think about it, but you just know that's what I'm supposed to do.
mhm,
And I think nobody has the perspective that law enforcement is among those things that brought order to society. Because if not for law enforcement, there would be anarchy in the
chaos.
streets, right?
Yeah,
So it's chaos everywhere. So I think people just lost that. That's the general perspective. I think people
mhm,
see law enforcement just an unnecessary evil, really. And then there's the racial narratives that I can't ignore because obviously my skin is black and
right,
I'm in America, so I'm aware of the connotations that the police and things like that,
mhm,
how those kind of narratives get overlaid on top of those general consensuses. So those are some of the things that people think as a broad thing. Then you have the internal struggle of officers, and this is where like my own personal experiences come into play. And I'm sure you can probably share. There's
yeah,
been some very controversial topics that have come up in discussion. And no workplace promotes talking about some of the political and social stuff that happens. And it's not something that we look to talk about, but we're
yeah,
humans. Like I said earlier,
right,
we are people and we live lives and we have to be, when we take the uniforms off, we have to go to the store and we have to deal with these
yeah,
things. But some of the things like George Floyd and Mike Brown in the past, where
mhm,
these incidents that are very divisive happen. And the one that comes to mind for me is Colin Kaepernick because it ties in with my sports background and having played against Colin Kaepernick when he was in college and for a year, graduated and went on to bigger things. But when that taking a knee issue
mhm,
was brought up, and it was the passion that I have for this country and the conflict of what I understood to be a respectful protest at the time, um, voicing that opinion within the law enforcement community was a very much minority opinion, right?
yes,
There was a battle that happened
yeah,
between is Kaepernick should he
yeah,
be doing this? He's disrespecting all of the narratives that came out of that. And then I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, I understand the flaws he's trying to highlight, and
right,
I'm willing to say and willing to admit that some of them are right. Like, the whole of it isn't true, and maybe there's aspects of the socks he wore, or whatever the political statements now he became are different, but what can I take from that criticism? What can I take from that protest and say, you know what, departmentally or as an officer, even just in my own individual carrying out of my duty, how can I change so that's not the perception that somebody
mhm,
gets? So that somebody doesn't think that my sole purpose when I'm doing my job, when I'm doing my duty, somebody doesn't think my sole purpose is to take their rights, to hurt them and hunt them
yeah,
down in the streets. Cause that I took that personal. If
yeah,
that's how you view me, where did I fail? Because that's
right,
not what I am. I'm much more than that. I think that was my biggest, I guess, flag that I posted in the ground in those conversations where it's like, hey, we're gonna argue about this. And
yeah,
you could say, what your stance is, and I can hear that. I respect all of the military. I respect all of
right,
the negative aspects of that Kaepernick situation specifically. But at the same time, I'm gonna look myself in the mirror. I'm gonna look law enforcement in the mirror, and I'm gonna say, what can we change so that the community doesn't see us like that? Because
mhm,
how can we do this job if that's the reaction that people have?
mhm,
There's no way I can lawfully ask somebody to do something
yeah,
if that's the level of respect I'm getting from them in return.
yeah,
But those conversations happen, and like you said, the law enforcement community, we are different. We have different opinions. I think we're learning to handle accordingly the quote unquote bad apples and to
yeah,
praise the good and all those things. And I think if nothing else, this last 10 years or so have been productive in that we've had to look at it. We've had to see it.
mhm,
And we're on the front page of it. There's no hiding behind it.
yeah,
Whether you take action or not, I think that was my call is within my department and those that interact with me as an officer will not have that to say when they walk away. They won't be able to say
yeah.
that law enforcement is XYZ. Law enforcement was a good dude.
Yeah, and I absolutely can agree with that. You're definitely you were faced with a lot of thoughts these past few years, these past 4 or 5 years, and I think and I don't think they're limited to Black officers, but I do think that it's a different level, right? Because of the racial connection or the
Mhm.
connotation, whether you believe it or not. It's there, and so it hits us a little different because that's the
Yeah.
best way to say it. But no, and if we're just gonna be honest, like I said, I call the show the human side because I want to be real and show a human. But I know for me personally, it was hard. It was hard being a Black police officer, especially during all the George Floyd situation. It was very difficult because I know for me, I'm 100% proud of being a police officer. I'm proud of
Mhm.
what I do. I'm proud of the people that I work with. I know that I work with good people who are there for the right reasons and doing the right things. I'm also very proud to be a Black woman. Very
Right.
proud. And so the ability or the challenge of trying to juggle those two strong pieces of me, it was a challenge. Not gonna lie, there were some moments.
Yeah. It's the same. The pride that I have in who I am and who I've always been, and then the pride that I have in what I do now and what I represent, that it I knew there would be a conflict, but I don't think I was ready for how intense that particular moment in time was for me
Yeah,
and for I'm sure Black officers everywhere, where it was the loudest, I think, in my lifetime, at least, the loudest it's been, the loudest the division has been between law enforcement and the Black community. And I know that there's other times, and the Watts rise and go. I just wasn't there for that. I didn't feel it.
right,
I didn't have my feet in both worlds, so to speak.
right,
And I
right.
remember being specifically confronted with the question of voicing my opinion on the George Floyd and the
Mm,
situation and how even from as I'm saying it now, I'm recalling I was speaking from a law enforcement perspective, how the tactics may have been flawed and how
mhm,
this could have gone this way or what have you. And Monday morning quarterbacking, I know, but just
right.
having a conversation with people, like with family
Yeah,
and trying to bring understanding to it and trying not to disregard George Floyd as a person or anything like that, but just being that voice of reason and what I thought at the time and expressing my feelings in a non in an off the outside of my duty way. It's just
yeah,
personal. And I remember being confronted with the question is like somebody else asked for me, "What are you saying?" But when you say that, and this is one of my law enforcement buddies who chimed in, it's like, "What are you saying?" And it's like, "Do you not represent the badge?" And I was like, "What?" And as I'm pondering, somebody from my personal life jumps in and is like, "He represents the badge, but he takes that off, and
mhm,
he's always gonna be Black." And I was like,
yeah,
"Wow." And I'm looking at the conversation, and that's the internal conflict that I was going through in that moment. It's like, how do
yeah,
you juggle that? How do you like the weight of that,
mhm,
trying to do my duty? It's an important duty. It's an important job. Like this profession is it's a noble one, and I
yeah,
don't say that lightly, and I take that seriously. But then the essence of who I am is also important. If that's how I didn't build this country, I didn't build up the history that led to being Black having
everything.
so much
Right,
significance. Like we
right,
didn't choose that.
right.
That's a script that already existed for us.
Yeah,
We can do
absolutely.
what we can to change that narrative and all that, and that's part of this profession. That's an angle. But
Mhm,
when I was faced with that, it was like, how do you navigate this? And in that moment, I probably didn't do the best that I could have, but
mhm,
I eventually got around to choosing to withdraw from that
yeah,
conversation. I was like, my silence in this moment is the best
it's
because I don't
better.
want to
Yeah,
disrespect either world. I don't want to
right.
step on anybody. This is a moment that just has to have its own life, and
Yeah,
I get connected to it in any negative way on either side of that. And I pray that I don't have a moment that's like that going forward. I pray that
again,
we've
right?
gotten better, right? But,
Right,
we've seen that
right.
it will repeat. It has
Yeah,
repeated, but,
yeah.
I just pray that that bridge is
Hopefully, we're
solidified.
retired by then.
Right. I wanna be looking at that as a off duty. "Hey, I put my years in. That's somebody else's
Right,
deliver right now." But
exactly.
it was tough. It's tough when the worlds collide like that,
Yeah,
when there's overlap and when it's so divisive. I don't think again, I said it before. I There was not a moment in my life where I felt as conflicted as that. Like
yes,
that kind there
yes.
like I faith, football, everything was even when I got into law enforcement, I'm really law enforcement. I'm learning and I'm developing this career path. And it was easy. It was well defined what I was doing. And then
Yeah,
that moment for me, it was like, what am I doing? Am I
right,
doing the right thing? Is
right.
being pro law enforcement right in this moment?
Yeah,
Is being pro black right in this moment? And
yeah.
can you do both? And for me, I couldn't find that path. Like I said, I withdrew from the conversation. I was like, I'm gonna step back and I'm just
Yeah.
gonna I'm because I don't feel comfortable with that kind of division within myself. There was
Mhm.
so much conflict during that time.
Wow. Yeah, that man, it's you're right. It's hard. And how many years were you at the time? You're what, maybe 4 or 5,
So
5
that
years
was
on at
that
the
was
time,
5
huh?
years, 5, 6 years. I was
Yeah.
going into my 6th, I believe, when that in
Yes.
2020, it was a rough time for everybody, but that was yeah, it was I was relatively new, I would
Right.
say. I hadn't had enough experience out there or
Yes.
experience in my personal life dealing with that, with those elements of stress around the job, and I was
Yeah.
like, I was beat. There was
Yeah.
some hard conversations that I had before I wised up to shut my mouth,
Yeah.
and it got intense, it got heated. I probably said some things in my personal life that I regret, that I probably severed some friendships or relationships that
Mhm.
was like, probably shouldn't have, but
Mhm.
it was tough, and I was very m I if I could go back and do that again, it would be a very different approach,
Different.
like, it would be so much more, like I said, thought out and
Yeah.
reasoned and all of the things that you learn as you go.
Absolutely. And when I think about when I first started, I was actually about to start the academy, and we had an orientation. I remember when my sisters came with me to the orientation, one of my instructors they had afterwards, you can just talk to them one on one before they yelled your face off. First day of the academy, you could be normal. And so I remember one of my sisters asked, "What is some advice that you would give her going in, or even us as a family?" Because they talk a lot about, and it's true, you have to have this type of job, especially in going to the academy. It's important to have that support system
Mhm,
because it's a lot. It's a lot of mental stress. It's physical stress. As athletes, you can usually handle the physical part, but it is a lot
mhm.
of mental stress. When you're learning, they're breaking you down and building you back up to think a certain way. Not brainwashed. I want to make that very clear. I know a lot of people try to say we're
That's what they would
brainwashed.
say, yeah, yeah.
We're not brainwashed. You're just
No,
trained.
no, we're trained,
Right.
trained is it. Yeah.
But she said, and I'll never forget this, and it goes back to what you're saying. She was like, and I didn't understand it honestly until I got, I'd say probably about 7 years, maybe, or probably right where you were at that point, maybe 6 years on the job, where she told me, you guys need to be mindful that there's going to be a change in her. There's going to be a change in the way she thinks, the way she acts, and you might not know how to respond to that. And telling me, Jill, you might not know how to respond.
Mhm,
Give it some time, work it out, and I'm telling you, you're gonna grow into that, and you're gonna be right back to who you were. And as I look back now, what I learned it to be was learning how to be both,
mhm,
learning how to be a police officer fully and a strong black woman. I had to learn that because it's not an easy thing. It's a challenge because, like you said, we didn't create the narrative of the issue of our race. The
right,
history of
right.
America created that. We were born into it. And that whatever you can say whatever you want, but it's there. It happened. The first forms of law enforcement were slave catchers. But I had to learn that. Like legit had to learn how to balance that. And I think it's amazing to see how you experienced that same thing, but you had to learn it on the
Yeah,
fly
yeah. It was
immediately.
Imma tell you what, it was very much, a difficult process, and I will say this, I think everybody in the world that has a work life and a home life has to find some balance between work you and home you, and this is might be marriage advice for somebody listening, but if you're at the job, you can't always be at the job. You're the
Yes.
boss at work, but when you come home, your dad, your
Yeah.
mom, your wife, your there's a switch that
Right.
switch is magnified times 2,000 when you're talking about law enforcement or even other first responder careers,
Right.
but particularly law enforcement. I think we're the only ones that are called to the fray that are not always wanted. Like we're there in a sense to resolve a conflict or to remove civil liberties.
Yes.
That's generally what
Yeah.
we are inserted into. We're not there to
Right.
save the day. We're not seen as the help necessarily, but so we deal with that, and with that comes the tragedies that we witness, the heinous acts that we have to intervene with, the stress of being in fight or flight all day long. And I remember vividly early in my career getting that same kind of advice of not to lose myself
Mhm.
necessarily, but to find the balance between those two. And I've never even put it into the words that you said, having to be both, but it's something that I came to understand. I never put it into
Mhm.
words, but you have to turn it off. I remember working graveyards as everybody did when they first started working
Mhm.
graveyards
Yeah.
and coming home and just being like, I was miserable when I walked through the door. I didn't
Mhm.
want to speak to anybody. I
Yeah.
was when I get stressed, I'm very introverted. I go into
Mhm.
my internal place and I try to sort it all out, and I just don't wanna be bothered, and
Mhm.
having a small son, a new wife, that was very hard, and I'm sure it was
Yeah.
hard on her, and I thank her for that because she
Yeah.
took some lumps along the way figuring this out, but,
Right.
not really.
Yeah,
It
right.
was rough for
There
us.
was no wife beating going on.
None of that.
Make
No, there
that
was
very
none of that,
clear.
to be clear. That was funny. But no, so there was a learning process that was tough, and I remember I had to be very intentional about I would get in my car and I would drive home, and I got into the habit of driving home with no music on. Black
Yeah,
man, you get in the car, the music is always on.
right.
That's just how we commute. But I was, you know what? Intentionally, I need to quiet my mind. I would turn the radio off and I would just drive home in silence, just me and the road. And I would get to my house and I would sit in the driveway. I don't know how long, some days were longer than others, but I would sit there and just think. The thinking after some days doing that turned into meditation. The meditation turned to prayer. And it was
Mhm.
very intentional of asking myself to come back to myself and to
Mm.
get ready to be who I needed to be walking into my house.
Wow.
And that was how extreme I went at times and how deliberate I had to be about being both. Like I had to
Yeah,
turn into somebody that was willing and ready to jump in and be here, fight mode if I
right.
needed to be in the stress of the job, and then to come home and be dad and to be able to pick my son up with a smile on my face because I think he was the light for me at home that said I can't be a cop at home. I
Mm.
can't be the badge here. I have to be dad. So I had to figure out how to turn it off, how to have that balance. And now it's a little easier. There's
Right.
moments you have your days where you come home and you're like, I can't. I don't got it now.
Yeah.
Just give me some time. And my wife, like you said, the family has gotten better
Yeah.
at understanding those. My wife knows that when she calls me after work and I give her that tone, she's okay. I got
Okay.
this. I'll take care of it. You need a minute? Just yeah,
Yeah.
take your time.
Yeah.
So it's a balance, and but you have to be both. You can't do the job with reservations, right? That's not safe. You can't.
It's not.
You have anything in your mind, anything blocking you from what your tasks are. You can't police your house.
Yeah.
You can't be an officer in the home. That just it doesn't work for anybody. And there's stats out there to prove it, and we can
Yeah.
go into what law enforcement. I don't have the exact numbers, but there's a lot of family issues that are higher among law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
That and you can see
Yeah.
why. If you lived it, you understand exactly what the
Yeah.
problems are or how it can be problematic if you don't keep it in check.
Absolutely. I actually I teach a course at work that talks about wellness. One of the issues or one of the topics is wellness. And you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, is there because we are exposed to so much violence and just trauma and we don't have the time to process it
Hmm.
that you should. You can easily go from a shooting call to domestic violence or whatever, and you're not processing any of these things that you just witnessed. And the human brain is just not set up that way. As a human being, you're not supposed to live
Right,
like that.
right.
You're
And
not supposed to live like that.
it's that like you said, that the way that the job happens a lot of times, you have to push things back because you're going to the next. But those things don't go away. And I didn't mention this, but like when I was in college, my background and my degree is in psychology. So I have a very keen interest in the psychology of experiencing the world and how
Mhm.
the things that we don't even really understand that we're perceiving end up in our subconscious. Like the domestic we left, we thought we forgot about it, but now it's
Yeah,
just buried back here. The
yeah,
thing we saw in the
yeah,
corner, we it didn't bother us at that moment, like that the body that was over there. Or
yeah.
you know, I worked in the jail for the first 2 years of my career, the first 3 years, and it was like the things that I saw, the shock to my conscience that I thought, okay, in that moment, I didn't cry, I didn't break down,
Mhm.
I didn't have to leave the room, I didn't throw up, whatever the case may be,
Right.
that I thought was like what you're supposed to do. If it
Yeah,
bothered you, that's you would know.
yeah.
But those things would come back 3 weeks later, and it's like you
Trigger.
wake up in the middle of the night, "Wait a minute, what's
Yeah,
going on? Are you okay?" And then you like my
yeah,
wife's like, "Why are you crying? What do you get
yeah,
off of me? What are you talking about?" But because it's there, like
yeah,
how those things bother us and the wellness aspect of, you know, law enforcement officers that
yeah,
sometimes ends tragically, honestly, if we're being real about it. Those are the
yeah,
things that
yeah.
we talked about, like you said, in orientation to be aware of. But I think as with other things like fitness and whatever, the complacency as officers, you forget to check up on yourself sometimes.
Mhm.
And that's a valuable part about where I am now in my career is I'm checking up on myself. And this is like in life
Yes.
and then in my professional life, is you gotta
Yeah,
check in. Am I good? After that incident's clear, when that call is cleared, it's okay, now let me step back and see. Let me assess. Did that bother
Yeah,
me? Is it how do I really
right.
feel about that before I move on?
Absolutely, and that's awesome. I think we don't talk about this kind of stuff enough, and I try to express this and really just push that really hard to the officers that I'm talking to during this training because we don't and we need it. And unfortunately, suicide is the number one thing that kills officers.
Mhm.
It's not shootings at work, it's not radio calls, it's suicide. We unfortunately in my department, we just had another one, and of course everyone's shocked. It is no one didn't appear that person. I didn't know that person personally, but those who knew them, that was a response. And I unfortunately I think every officer, if you haven't already, unfortunately, you're gonna have some type of connection to where you're gonna know an officer who unfortunately has committed suicide.
Right.
And to me, that blows my mind that we don't put more emphasis on wellness because we
Mhm.
know it's a problem. It's been like that. It's not a surprise. Oh, all of a sudden.
Right, right,
This has
right.
been going on for a long time. And that kind of one brings me to one of my next questions. One of the things that I've been studying and really been trying to learn more about is, and I think it could be really beneficial to officers, is improving our emotional intelligence, kind of learning how to manage our self-awareness, our self-perception, how we perceive other people's emotions and how we manage them. It's pretty
Right.
much what emotional intelligence is. So what type of it doesn't have to be emotional intelligence, it's just something that I have been really studying. What are some trainings you think that would be beneficial to officers?
You know what? It's crazy because you mentioned that our chief of our department, Jason Potts, he's relatively new to our department, but he's been really big about emotional intelligence. And we've been trying
Mhm,
to figure out ways to incorporate that more in training, whether it be pre-academy stuff like testing and getting some evaluation on the baselines and trying to assess how to better teach and to better train officers, or a post-academy thing to understand best fit, or maybe what kind of emphasis needs to be done to get a better understanding of how we are handling our emotions or being emotionally intelligent on the
mhm,
job. There's a lot of stuff. Being in the field is just a very different, it's a different animal than teaching in a classroom. The unlimited resource version of me would say we could just have simulation training after simulation training where it's
mm,
actual scenario
mhm,
based. Like you're out in the field and you're doing things without what appears to be the safety net of a classroom. To me, that kind of exposure to these situations where your emotions have the ability to take over, whether it's interfering with your pattern recognition or things like that, along that line where you really take time to assess how you respond to certain situations and then
right.
placement in the best fit for you. Some people are more cut out for community policing. Some people need to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
specialty posts. Those
right.
kind of things that you learn from getting your emotional intelligence and understanding where you are. It's really interesting. I don't want to pretend to be an expert on the subject or
Yeah,
anything like that, or what
yeah.
training should be done, but I think that a more anytime you have more intense training, I think you get better results, and we've seen that with law
Mhm,
enforcement agencies. If you focus on the sharpshooting, you're gonna get better shooting, you're gonna get more accuracy out of your scores. If you focus on emotional intelligence, then you're gonna get more
yeah,
emotionally intelligent officers, and we're getting into a day and age where you need to have
yeah,
emotional intelligence to do this job, and I think that's, for me, what helped with this job is I have a background in communicating and being the popular guy or being boisterous or being the guy who the media talks to when I was playing football, and that kind of background helped me be more comfortable in those situations where my emotional intelligence was tested. Just being able to talk to people and level with them and feel where their emotions are and empathize, when it's
mhm,
appropriate, has saved my skin a lot when I'm
yeah,
talking to people, and I've been the one who's been able to talk people down who are it's funny to
yes,
watch somebody engage with a subject like with where they're completely lost and their anger
yeah,
has consumed them, and now they're just a shouting match going on.
yep,
And then somebody steps in who's not, and I've been this person who's observed it. I'm just like, huh, I see what they're saying because I'm listening. I see what they're saying
yep,
because I'm taking my time to. And
yeah,
I'm saying the same thing. I'm giving you the same message of what we're gonna do from here. But
mhm,
because I'm taking you to a place with what the skills that I have with my communication, you respond better. And
yep,
those are kind of things I
yep,
think that law enforcement needs for sure. I wish I had like a specific training. I know we have reached out to several companies. In my position now as a detective, I work more with the administration on things like this for hiring process, and we've looked into emotional intelligence training or testing rather, as a part of our academy
It's good.
teaching. So as a part of that, to get at least when we get new hires and while they're in the learning process at academy, you can get a baseline before they go to FTEP, before they go to the field training phase to understand what this person needs, or like where their emotional intelligence is. Because
Mhm.
unfortunately, a lot of people don't have it. Like that's
No,
something that you never thought you would have to go
right.
into. But I think we're learning more and more that people need to be able to make intelligent decisions
Yeah,
when faced with crisis and when faced with
right.
adversity, especially when you're talking about emotions running high.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I've become passionate with, and I'm in the process of hopefully creating a program. So who knows? Maybe we can collaborate.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I would love
Because
that.
I agree. And it's exactly how you explained it. You have those skill sets. One of the things I remember when I first started, my training officer, literally the first night working the night shift, and we got in the car, and he said, "Look, this job is not that hard."
I am nervous right now.
Exactly. I am in South Central, okay? I just heard about 6 murders yesterday.
Oh my god.
But he was like, "Look, this job is really not that hard. It's just about how you talk to people." And to this day, that has never been the most truest statement that I've ever heard. It's the job, there's challenges with it, obviously, but
Right.
it does come down to how you communicate with people. It can make or break you, because 'cause I've seen it too, where
100%.
you see people like, "Bro, just listen, relax. You're not gonna win shouting. You're not.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not gonna
yeah.
work that way. It's
Yeah.
not."
I remember
But yeah,
the first time I used the false agreement. I don't know if that's even a real way to look at it. It's I just you give that fake, "Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, that's where the miscommunication, because you weren't supposed to do that though. That it might be a little confusing, but I completely understand that now, why you would be a little bit confused about that, but Imma need you to turn around, put your hands behind your back."
right. But what's gonna happen is it's funny. We laugh at that because look, the real is I've done that too. The point is it
Just
works,
for whatever reason, it's
right?
like, there was a way where it was like ask, tell, make, you know what I'm saying? Like, I asked you, and
Yeah,
Imma
yeah, it was
tell
that
you, and now Imma
yes.
make you, and it's
That
sometimes
used to be
it
the process. Yeah,
right, that used to be it, and it's now it's no, it's
yeah,
okay, ask, listen, reason,
yeah.
and then there's so many different,
Yeah,
uh,
there's a lot more asking
de-escalation
in there for
steps.
sure.
There's so much more that can happen, and I think, again, I would say working in the jail, I know a lot of people have perceptions about what the jail is, and you just
Mm,
glorify babysitters, and I'm not gonna lie, there are moments where you're like, "Okay, I'm safe." Like, the
yeah,
threats of the streets,
yeah,
of the unknowns that are
right.
happening around every corner, it's definitely different. It's a quote unquote safer environment. But when you only have your mouth to use to defend you or to get compliance, there's a different level of confidence that you have to build
Yes.
in yourself. And I've watched, and it's funny because you watch when officers from the streets come in and they have to put their weapons away. You can't bring your weapons into the jail. The level of insecurity that
Wow.
having to use this comes up. It's
Yes.
like, how do I get now without the threat of this? How
Wow.
do I get compliant? I'm like, wow, that's a trip that
It is.
your
I've
demeanor
never thought
completely
about that.
changed, right? It was like you was here, you was ready to go, and then you
Right.
came in here. Now it's you look a little nervous in here, but I
Wow.
got comfortable in that element real quick. Like I'm
Yeah.
talking, sometimes it's a unit full of 200 plus inmates where they're
Yeah.
like they're out in the day room, out and about doing their own thing. The language is still the same as the street. They're doing the same. It's the same gang activity. It's the same threat. They just don't have guns, and you know what
Yeah.
they have, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
plotting is still there. You gotta be able to say, "Okay, it's time to turn the TV off." I know we watching the Cowboys and the Niners. Lunch is coming. You gotta lock it up.
Right.
Your time's
Right.
up. Or you on your phone with your girlfriend. You gotta hang it up. I need you to hang
Right.
it up. How do you get them to do that? Like,
Without
go
the
make them do that.
tools. Yeah.
Yeah, without the
Only tool you
tools on
got is
you,
your
it's
mouthpiece.
this. You
That's
gotta
it.
be able to talk. I
Yeah.
wish I would say every law enforcement agent, we talk about training. I think just
Uh,
conversation training. That needs a
yeah.
basic part. We got report writing and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And I
Yeah.
think, but talking needs to
For
be
sure.
higher on our priority list of what
Yeah.
officers need to be comfortable doing.
Yep, absolutely. We train. I say this all the time. We put a lot of time and effort into tactics training, which we
Mhm.
should, because the job is very difficult, and we do that for a reason. We know these things can happen, so we're training for these possibilities. But if we even put, I would say, 75% of that effort that we put in tactics, that we put into our emotional intelligence building, it would reduce the amount of issues I think that we have in law enforcement, because it's really how you perceive people's emotions, how you perceive your emotions, and how you manage it. That's what it is, and that's key when you're communicating with people.
It is. You gotta learn how to be a mirror sometimes, man.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
you're giving me, I need to be able to receive it and reflect it back so you can understand where I'm coming from. And that
absolutely.
I've gained more respect from people leveling with them in those situations and having that it then I think just being a law enforcement officer, like,
Yeah,
you can't always cop talk. That's a
right. You gotta just be a person,
it's
be human.
right. Sometimes every
Yeah,
now and then
yeah,
you gotta break the "Yes, sir,"
yeah,
No,
yeah,
sir, no, ma'am." Like, you like, sometimes you gotta level with who you're talking to and really see them for who they are, and people genuinely feel that, and I know I feel it
yeah.
when it's just like, when people don't talk to me, like, if I'm in uniform
Mhm.
or with my badge on my hip, my gun on my I wear
Yeah,
civilian clothes now, but when I'm dressed like an officer and people see me as a person and talk to me, respectfully, but at the same time, they see me as a human being, it feels
right.
good. They're like, "Okay, you really understood
Yeah.
that. You understood where I'm coming from. You're talking to
Yep,
me. You're
yep,
not talking to the badge. You're talking to a
yep.
person." And in the same way, like, sometimes, every now and then, you're not talking to a subject. You're talking to a person who, like I said about officers, you don't know what the officer went through. You don't know what that person just went through. You don't know, yes, they've committed a crime. And again, I'm not the tactics like we talk about, we're not ignoring tactics because
No,
this is a whole different
it's
ballgame. But we're
needed.
talking about
Yeah,
coming to unknowns and all that. I got that. I'm
yeah,
talking about when you're in those engagements with a person who's a maybe person and
yeah,
you're trying to keep them or maybe even flip them to a yes person, the
yeah,
ability to see
right.
that and see where they are, that split decision could make it so your tactics aren't even necessary. You get
Yeah,
full compliance from the person, and I think a lot of officers need to understand that, and it
yeah,
takes time to break that down, to break old habits, because that was
yeah.
the way back in
Oh,
that
for
was the
sure,
standard, but I think it's
for
valuable
sure.
that more officers
Yeah.
understand that and take that seriously.
Yeah, yeah, it does take a little time to work through tradition. There's some good things. I like tradition, but there are sometimes we can hold on to it a little bit too long. When
Mhm.
there's times that it's not working, then hey, you gotta call an audible. Okay, let's pivot real quick and try something else. Let's see if it works. I love that. Let's see. We'll wrap it up. But one more. Let me ask you this. So, how would you define trust within the context of community and law enforcement relations?
Oh, man.
How would you I know it's a tough one. How
That is
how
a
would
big
you
one.
it is. That's why I wanna ask because I think you can handle it.
That yeah, you know what? There's so many again, it's layers and it's the areas of gray, but
Yeah,
I think the trust it has to be so reciprocal, but I think what the community has entrusted in us is to enforce the laws that have been established by the community. I
yeah,
think the
okay.
closest I could say to that is a community has to trust that what we are enforcing are the laws that they have chosen to
You
govern
gave
them.
us,
You
yes.
gave us these,
Yeah,
and these are the things that we are protecting as a law enforcement
yeah.
community. I think there's a lot of reasons why that line has been muddied. And it
Mhm,
gets real political,
mm,
what individual rights are and what the government's rights are, what the government's interests are, all of those things. The concept of investigative stops or things that we are doing
yeah,
to proactively prevent
yeah,
crimes that maybe fudge that line a little bit.
yeah,
But I think the community has to trust first that the things that we're enforcing are the laws that they have
yeah,
chosen to govern them. And I think the hardest ask of the community is to trust and to allow us to police them. And
yeah,
that's a loaded
yeah,
way. It's a simple way to say a loaded thing, but it is hard to look accountability in the eye.
yeah,
Like, when
yeah,
you speed like, the person like you said earlier, you're speeding to be able to say, instead of feeling the need, it's a human reaction to get out of trouble, to
mhm,
maneuver out of it, or to look for a favor. If everybody got pulled over and was like, "Ah, I did it. I sped." If everybody could look accountability and consequence in the eye and say, "Yeah, you got me." I think that would go a long way to building the trust from law enforcement to the community. I don't think it's fair to think that law enforcement just does the job and is not human and doesn't feel
yeah,
somewhat betrayed by the community at times. But I think if the community could look accountability in the eye and accept it, I think the law enforcement community would have a more trust that the community has law enforcement's back. And
yeah,
I think that's an important side of it too, because I think a lot of law enforcement agencies and officers feel betrayed by the communities that they police. Whether it's, "Oh, these communities
mhm,
are too violent, they don't trust us, they don't care, they're
yeah,
trying to hurt us," and then that impacts their ability to do their job. So I think the
yeah,
community has to show good faith and say, "You know what? They are accountability. They are me facing the consequences. That's what they're supposed to do." I'm gonna go to you because you gym a lot, and I see you on social media. You gym a
Yeah.
lot, but when you're on a good strict workout plan that is for your betterment, that you're
Yeah.
trying to get a summer body, it's very good to have an accountability partner.
Yeah, it is.
Whether it's your trainer, whether it's a
Right.
friend you go to gym all the time with, somebody that says, "You're not why you didn't go today? Why you
Yeah.
eating that?" You know what I mean? What's going on? It hurts, it sucks 'cause you're not doing it. It sucks to look that but at the end of the day, it helps you get to your results better.
Yeah.
I think if the community looked at law enforcement as that,
Yeah.
and that simplifies a lot, but yes, you're trying to be a better society. You're trying to have peace. You're trying to have all of the things, happiness, safety, whatever in your daily life. The law enforcement community or the law enforcement agency in your community is your accountability partner. Hey,
Yeah.
you're trying to get to
It's good.
peaceful society. I want to help you do that. I'm going to hold you accountable to the things that you already
Yeah.
said. You said you wanted your
Yeah.
summer body. You can't
Yeah.
skip a workout.
Yeah.
Put the
Yeah.
pizza down if you want your
Right.
summer body, right? Like
Right.
eating
Right.
in a school zone. You said you wanted safer schools.
Right.
Slow down. I'm your
Yeah.
accountant. Here's your ticket. Like,
Yeah. You
well,
want your
that
kids to play
right?
outside with no
Right,
problems.
right.
Yeah.
This is the community you want. This is what I'm
Yeah.
telling you. And I
Yeah.
think that, like you said, the trust, that is the goal on both sides is very important. And that's it's a big thing. And
It is.
it will get there. I fingers crossed. We'll get there. And these conversations happening with the community, I think help that mission along.
That was very well said, man. I knew you can handle it. I knew you can handle that question. I knew you could handle it. But yeah, so that was great. I love your insight and everything that you had to provide. This was a great conversation. I know I learned some things. I hope, and I know, I don't say I hope, I know that the viewers and listeners you learned some things as well. Like always, you can always comment if you agree, if you disagree, if you have other topics that you want to hear, or if you want to have this conversation with me. I'll have my contact information in the show notes. Reach out to me, and who knows, maybe you can be the person that I have this human conversation with. I want to thank Detective Herring here for coming on and having this conversation and speaking to us. I appreciate you. I'm proud of you, man. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. It's always good to have some more popos in the family.
It is. It is good. It's good to be able to look to you as an example on how to navigate that and to be inspirational in your right. And I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you listening to the call and stepping up to this and making this your mission because you have inspired, whether or not you know it from afar, you have inspired me and given me strength
Awesome.
to push through as the family and navigating some of the things that I know you have navigated. You do it well, and I think you serve the
Thank you.
community well. And this mission, I think, is a fruitful one. Just keep pushing.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. But yeah, you guys, we're gonna make sure you hit that notification bell so you know the next episode comes out. Subscribe as well. We'll have some more human conversations. And remember, if you show me your human side, I'll show you mine. All right, y'all. Peace.